Okay, so you ready for this? Today we're tackling a really tough topic.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking into the reactions of 7 teenagers who are facing either a death sentence or life in prison for murder.
Heavy stuff.
And we're going to hear actual courtroom footage,
Yeah.
see real emotions,
Wow.
or sometimes the lack of them, and it just might make you question everything you thought you knew about justice.
It's a really powerful look at who we are, as a society, how we punish, how we try to rehabilitate, and really just how we deal with the whole consequence of violent crime, especially when it's committed by someone so young.
And, we're not going to sugarcoat anything. We're diving right into the specifics of their crimes.
Well, absolutely.
But our main focus is on what happens after the gavel drops.
Yeah.
What goes through the mind of a teenager facing this ultimate punishment.
Right.
And what can their reactions or sometimes lack of reactions tell us
exactly
of the human psyche under that kind of pressure.
It's fascinating. It's like we're looking right into this pressure cooker of emotions,
Yeah.
Remorse, defiance, maybe even just this desperate attempt to grasp at any kind of control in a situation where they have absolutely no control.
So let's start with Michael Bargo in Florida.
Okay.
He was only 18 when he got a death sentence for the murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
This one was especially brutal, and I think what really struck me in the footage was how premeditated it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't just some kind of heat-of-the-moment thing.
You're right. It was planned out very deliberately, driven by jealousy and this really twisted desire for revenge.
Right.
Bargo thought that Seth had abused his ex-girlfriend, and that sent him down this road to vengeance.
So they lured Seth to a trailer, ambushed him, beat him, and Bargo was the ringleader in all this.
Yeah.
Shot him multiple times.
It's sweet.
And the footage shows him getting the death sentence, and he just has this stoic expression on his face.
Yeah.
No tears, no outbursts, just this, blankness.
It's that blankness that I think throws a lot of people.
Right.
It makes you wonder, is he really feeling nothing?
Yeah.
Or is it more like, is this some kind of psychological response to trauma, where he's shutting down his emotions to cope?
Yeah.
It's a question that really lingers over the whole case.
Now let's compare that to Austin Myers in Ohio.
Okay.
Also 19 at the time of his sentencing. He also got the death penalty.
Right.
Accordingly, it is the judgment of the law and the sentence of the court that for the premeditated murder of Seth Jackson, you, Michael Shane Bargo, are sentenced to death.
But for a very different crime.
Yeah.
A robbery that went very, very wrong.
With his friend Justin Back.
Yeah, with his friend Justin Back.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to make off with a ton of money.
Yeah, raid a safe at Back's family home.
Right, but it was just a bunch of paperwork.
Paperwork and, pocket change.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to how impulsive young people can be.
Absolutely. Their brains are still developing, right?
Yeah.
That prefrontal cortex, the part that helps you make good decisions and control your impulses,
Right.
It's not fully developed yet, so they're more prone to risk-taking.
Right.
And they don't always think about the consequences.
And just like Bargo,
yeah.
Myers showed absolutely no emotion when the judge gave him his sentence.
Yeah.
It's this weird parallel. 2 teens.
Right.
2 very different crimes, but the same.
Chilling detachment.
Yeah, chilling detachment.
And that makes you think, is there something similar about how their minds work?
Right.
Is this stoicism some kind of defense mechanism? They're trying to protect themselves from facing this horrible reality?
Yeah.
Or could it be something deeper, some kind of psychological condition that might play a role in their actions in the first place? These are the kinds of questions that forensic psychologists are always wrestling with.
Now we've got Dexter Johnson in Texas,
Okay.
also sentenced to death for a double murder during a crime spree, and his reaction was totally different.
Yeah. This courtroom footage was just chaos.
Yeah.
Unlike the other two. Johnson just explodes. He's furious, lunging at the victim's family, screaming, shouting. It just paints a completely different picture of how a young mind might be processing a death sentence.
It's like his brain is just short-circuiting, overwhelmed by all these emotions he can't control.
And you have to think about the context, This is all happening in the courtroom. The victims' families are right there.
Yeah.
Their grief and their anger are so raw.
Yeah.
It's a supercharged environment.
Right.
And for someone like Johnson, who probably already has issues with trauma and impulsivity, this could be a trigger for that kind of explosive reaction.
It makes you wonder how much of this is real remorse.
Right.
And how much is it this kind of performance because of the courtroom setting?
Yeah. Is it a way of trying to get some control back, even if it's just through an outburst?
Okay.
Or is it something else entirely?
Yeah.
It's tough to say for sure.
Right.
But one thing's clear, Johnson's reaction opens up a whole new set of questions about how complex human emotions are, how much our environment affects us, and how all of that plays out when a young person is facing the ultimate consequence.
Yeah.
It's
a lot.
It is. Yeah.
It's just crazy how these reactions are all over the place.
Yeah.
From stoic to totally enraged.
Right.
And then we get to a case that just throws another wrench in the works. Sean Sellers in Oklahoma.
Right.
He got a death sentence, too, for killing his parents and a convenience store clerk.
Mm-hmm.
But Sellers' case is different.
Right.
There's this whole other layer to it, the claim of demonic influence.
Exactly. We're not just talking about crime and punishment anymore. We're getting into belief systems and mental health and the possibility of manipulation.
So Sellers said he was a Satanist influenced by demons.
Right. And he seemed to just accept his fate.
Yeah.
Almost like he welcomed death to escape this demonic hold he felt he was under.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Could there be any truth to what he's saying?
Right.
Or is this some calculated legal move to avoid taking responsibility?
It's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, how do we even begin to untangle something like that?
It's a question that even the most experienced forensic psychologists struggle with, you know, about dissociative disorders where someone's reality is totally disconnected.
Right.
That can manifest in some really extreme ways, even criminal behavior.
So someone could actually believe they're acting under the influence of something?
Yeah.
Even if it's not real in the way we usually think of it?
Exactly. Their perception of reality is distorted.
Right.
And their actions, as awful as they are, come from that distorted reality.
It's a tough concept to wrap your head around.
It is.
And even harder to deal with in the legal system.
Absolutely.
It forces us to ask these really uncomfortable questions about free will, mental illness, and the limits of what we really understand about human behavior.
For sure. It highlights the need for a much more nuanced approach to criminal justice, one that takes into account not just the crime itself, but the person's mental state, their past, and all the factors that might have led to their actions.
Okay, now let's switch gears to a case everyone knows, Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter.
Right.
Now, he didn't get a death sentence, but the judge gave him 34 consecutive life sentences without parole.
Essentially, he's going to die in prison.
Yeah.
And it raises this really interesting legal and ethical debate. Is there a real difference between a death sentence and a life sentence without parole?
Something legal experts have been arguing about for decades.
Yeah.
Is one more humane than the other?
Right.
Or is it all just semantics?
And think about what it does to the person psychologically.
Yeah.
To be told you're going to spend every single day for the rest of your life locked up in prison, that's a huge weight to carry.
Especially for someone like Cruz, whose brain was still developing when he committed the crime.
Exactly.
It makes you think about the long-term effects of these sentences.
Yeah.
Do they actually stop other people from committing crimes?
Right.
Or do they just crush the person, leaving them in total despair?
These are crucial questions, and unfortunately, we don't have clear answers yet.
Right.
The research on the long-term psychological impact of life sentences, particularly on young people, is still pretty new.
And everyone reacts to these situations differently, right?
Of course, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Yeah.
But by studying these cases, by trying to understand the psychology behind it all, we can start to piece together a better understanding of how people cope with extreme punishment and what that means for our approach to criminal justice.
So we've talked about cases where reactions were everything from stoic to explosive.
Yeah.
Now let's look at two where there was basically no reaction at all.
Okay.
Jordan Wade was only 17 when he got 172.5 years in prison for his role in a quadruple murder during a robbery.
Wow, that's a huge sentence. It basically guarantees he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Yeah, and what's striking is that during the sentencing, Roe v. Wade showed absolutely no emotion. Yeah, he just stood there like he was totally detached from everything that was happening. And then there's Russell Burrell, convicted in a Rhode Island triple murder.
Right.
And he got 6 life sentences plus 10 years.
Another young guy facing a future locked up.
Yeah, and throughout the trial and sentencing, he was completely impassive.
No signs of remorse or distress.
No, it's something we've seen before in some of the other cases.
It is.
And it makes you wonder, what's going on inside their heads?
Yeah.
Is this emotional detachment just a way of coping, a way to protect themselves to the impact of the sentence?
Right, or is it a sign of something more disturbing?
Yeah.
A lack of empathy,
Right.
maybe a disconnect from what they've done and the pain they've caused.
It's impossible to know for sure without really digging into their individual psychological profiles.
That's true.
But this lack of outward emotion, it really influences how the public sees these cases.
Yeah.
People assume they're guilty, that they're hardened criminals.
It's tricky.
Yeah, because we can't just jump to conclusions based on what we see on the outside.
Exactly. You can't equate a lack of visible emotion with a lack of remorse
Right.
or a lack of understanding about how serious their actions were. It could be trauma, a delayed reaction,
Right.
or even just their cultural or personal way of dealing with grief and loss.
It reminds us that we need to look beyond the surface
Yeah.
to consider all the complexities of human emotion and how differently it can show itself.
Especially in these high-pressure situations.
Absolutely.
And it highlights how important it is to have trained professionals like forensic psychologists involved.
Yeah.
They can help us get a clearer picture of the person's mental state, their potential for rehabilitation, and the risks they might pose.
So we've seen all kinds of reactions.
We have.
From emotional outbursts to being totally stoic to this almost complete absence of emotion.
Yeah. And each case seems to raise more questions than answers.
It does.
Well, that's what this field is all about, right? We're dealing with the human mind, which is probably the most complex thing in the universe. Right. There are no easy answers or simple explanations.
But by looking at these cases, by thinking about the psychology involved,
Yeah.
we can start to unravel the mystery a little bit and get a better understanding of how young people process the seriousness of their actions.
Absolutely.
And the consequences they face.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into these really complicated cases, what are you thinking about?
Well, honestly, it's just the sheer variety of reactions that's really sticking with me.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw everything from that stoicism and emotional detachment
Right.
to those intense outbursts of anger and even claims of like demonic possession.
It's wow.
It just shows you there's no one right way to react when you're hit with a life-changing sentence like that.
And that's so important to remember. We can't judge these kids just based on how they react on the surface. You know, their emotional responses are filtered through so many things, their individual psychology, their cultural background, even their legal strategy.
You know, one thing that keeps coming back to me is this whole nature versus nurture debate.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how much of their behavior and the choices they made comes down to their personality and how much of it was shaped by their environment, you know, how they were raised.
Made their circumstances.
Exactly. It's a question that's been around forever.
It has.
But when you're talking about criminal behavior, especially with young people,
Yeah.
it gets even more complex.
Absolutely. It's rarely just one thing
Right.
that makes someone do something like this.
It's more like this whole web of influences.
Yeah.
Genetics,
Yeah.
family dynamics, socioeconomic factors, peer pressure.
Exposure to violence.
Exactly. All of these things can play a part in shaping how a young person sees the world and the choices they make.
And that's why we have to approach these cases with nuance, you know, with this understanding that there's always more to the story than what you see at first glance.
It also makes me think about the limits of our justice system. Is it really equipped to deal with all of this complexity?
Right.
Can we really expect a judge and jury who might not know much about forensic psychology or the teenage brain to make these huge decisions about a young person's life?
It's a valid point, and it really highlights how much we need more specialized training in the juvenile justice system.
Yeah.
We need judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys who are up to date on all the latest research about teenage brain development, the effects of trauma, the potential for rehabilitation.
And what about the role of mental health professionals?
Oh, they're essential.
Yeah, it seems like they're critical in these cases.
Absolutely.
Not just for evaluating the defendant's mental state, but also for coming up with treatment plans
Right.
and figuring out how much of a risk they pose to society.
We need a more integrated approach where mental health professionals are working closely with the legal system
Yeah.
to make sure that both the individual's needs and society's needs are being met.
It feels like there's a shift happening in how we think about criminal justice.
I think so, too.
Moving away from just punishment
Right.
towards a more well-rounded approach that looks at the root causes of crime
Yeah.
and the possibility of rehabilitation, especially for young offenders.
There's this growing realization that just locking people up, especially young people, doesn't
It-
actually solve the problem.
It doesn't fix the underlying issues.
Nope. We need to invest in things like early intervention programs, mental health services, and social support systems.
Right. Things that can actually help steer young people away from a life of crime.
Exactly.
So if you could leave our listeners with one final thought,
Okay.
one key takeaway from all of this, what would it be?
I'd say approach these cases and the whole issue of criminal justice with curiosity and an open mind. Don't just jump to conclusions based on what you see in the headlines or hear on the news.
Yeah.
Dig a little deeper. Learn more about how the mind works and what leads people to crime. Have those tough conversations. Challenge your own assumptions and be an advocate for a more just and compassionate way of dealing with these issues.
That's powerful, and I think it really sums up what this deep dive has been all about.
Yeah.
We've looked at some really tough and heartbreaking cases.
We have.
But we've also seen that there's hope for change,
There is.
for growth, and for a more understanding and humane approach to justice.
And who knows, maybe these conversations, these deep dives we're having,
Yeah.
they can help spark a movement towards a system that truly works for everyone.
Well, that's a great place to end it, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we hope you'll keep exploring these issues, keep learning,
Yeah.
keep asking questions, and keep fighting for a more just and compassionate world.